Hello and welcome to the Metaverse Show. I'm Jamie Burke, CEO and founder of Outlier Ventures, aka Crypto Shaman. We're going to be doing something unusual today. So, on the one hand, we are recording our Founders of Web3 podcast. And as you probably gathered, on the other hand, we are launching our Metaverse show with a special guest, somebody very close to Outlier Ventures and our thesis within the Metaverse, Ryan Gill. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, Jamie. Good to be here. We've gotten through some of the learning curve.
Yeah, so we've been trying to make this show happen in VR for a lot of time. We've wasted a lot of Ryan's time trying to make this happen. But anyway, we're here now. I think before we go into it, maybe some context as to what's happening. So this is being shot in VR chat in a virtual studio, as you can see. You'll see that there's a number of different camera angles coming through. It is being live edited by our producer, Roland. You might even see his black shadow, mysterious black shadow, moving around the space as we do this. But effectively, what we'll be doing is every week we'll be doing the show with a special guest who is either a founder, creator, innovator within the open metaverse, open being the operative word, leveraging things like blockchain, NFTs, and crypto to make a more user-centric, not just web and internet, but metaverse. And of course, that's because we're spending more and more time and money in these spaces. And so we wanted to like both dog food and experience what it's like to try to produce content as a live show in this space. And we'll be doing lots of other things, playing around with the format. But for now, this is the Metaverse Show Studio. And today we're going to kick off with an interview with Ryan, as I said. Now, just before we do, some special shout outs to Boombox Head, who built the studio and has helped us through a lot of teething pains. Actually, it was a customization of an existing studio that they've got on a whole lot of studios, originally by, I think it was nifties.com, who lent us the kind of core design and blueprint, and then we got to customize it. So thanks to those guys. And Boombox Head is working with Webiverse, who are doing some crazy things in the open metaverse, especially with things like VR chat. So let's get into it. So Ryan is, as I said, part of the Outlier portfolio. Actually, I think technically our first investment into the metaverse. How long ago was that now? Time's a bit of a blur.
March of
18
last
months
year.
ago? More? 2 years?
Just about 1 year ago, exactly.
And I even roomed with Ryan because when he arrived to come and work in our accelerator over from the US, it was the beginning. That's right, the beginning of lockdown, and he had nowhere to stay, and so he actually roomed in my house, which was a bit weird for both of us, but also very fun. And as a consequence of that, really informed a lot of my thinking over beer and wine as to what the open metaverse is all about. So was a natural first guest to launch the show with, and off the back of a paper that we did called the Open Metaverse OS Operating System. Again, he was a core contributor there. So Ryan is CEO and co-founder of Crucible. Crucible enables blueprints for the open metaverse. And these are tools for builders, creators, and portable digital identity for players. He often references Buckminster Fuller's, we are called to be architects of the future, not its victims. And of course, the open metaverse often references a lot of these kind of great thinkers, as well as science fiction, in thinking forward and projecting both its utopic, dystopic potential. Crucible's Emergent Sdk provides an easy on-ramp for game engine developers to access new decentralized web technologies. And that's both DeFi and NFTs, decentralized finance and NFTs, and networks of players and marketplaces where users are spending billions. And of course, COVID has really accelerated a lot of that. So as I said, I know you personally, and as part of the Outlier portfolio, you're also a venture partner. You kind of introduce a lot of projects back into our dedicated accelerator to the metaverse. But the reason why we originally invested in you guys was because the idea of decentralized identity or self-sovereign identity, and we'll unpack that a little bit later, is not only foundational to the web. We've never really had a native form of identity to the web, and that's caused a lot of its problems. But it's also a kind of elephant in the room within Web3, because we talk about decentralization, but without decentralized identity, how decentralized can the web actually be? But of course, now that becomes even more important in the context of the metaverse, because, of course, associated to identity, there's things like data, and with VR headsets like we've got on now to stream the show, they're collecting ever more amounts of data, spatial data of the room we're in, biometric data of how our eyes are responding to various stimuli. And of course, the open metaverse, which is the language that we use, of course, for the show, but to describe Crucible and the thesis at Outlier, is also being used by people like Tim Sweeney of Epic and Unreal Gaming Engine. So it's interesting that language is starting to permeate even within what you might class as the kind of more closed elements of the metaverse. So really looking forward to deep diving with you into the show. Before we do it, it's always good to try to contextualize a guest. Normally, I try to summarize the background. But what was interesting is, given I've known you for quite a while now, there's actually a lot about your background that I didn't know, including the fact that you worked at Scott Free Productions, which is Ridley Scott's production studio, which, to be honest with you, was my dream job. And that looked like your first job in Hollywood in 2011, right?
Yeah, first month. Yeah, that was the first month that I moved to LA.
Oh, okay. Right. Awesome. And that was like an internship or something?
It was when they were finishing Prometheus. They had to change every shot frame by frame to a stereoscopic 3D. And so I was brought in to keep the office open overnight.
Okay, cool. And then you founded a couple of things, Ascending Paradigms in 2010, 2015. You worked on the Monster Energy Outbreak Tour as a curator and producer, 2013 to 15, with people like Kendrick Lamar, Macklemore, and you're also an artist as well. You're also a musician as well, right?
Yeah, I've played guitar since I was about 12, and I also produce music just for fun as an outlet.
Just for shits and giggles. And so, can you talk us through then, I guess, the kind of build up in your career towards Crucible now? I know there's some time at Rock Nation, and you worked at PhD Ventures. So, I guess you were kind of coming from the creative industries generally towards the metaverse, right? That's kind of the direction of travel.
Yeah, and I gotta say, it's actually pretty special to do this right now. This obviously wasn't planned, but today, 1 year ago to the day, I was getting on the plane to leave from LA to London. And about a year before that,
Wow, there you go.
not to the day, I was with Mike Winkleman, people, at a MoGraph party that we did in LA. And I was still at Rock Nation at that time, kind of forming and thinking about the ideas for this. So it really is kind of a pretty symbolic thing in how far it's come in the 2-3 years, and thinking about what comes next is exciting. So to actually have this conversation as avatars, in a virtual studio is pretty cool.
Oh man, I'm welling up, and I feel also a bit guilty that we didn't get a virtual cake to celebrate that. So then I guess the first kind of foray into blockchain was Tokyo Blockchain, right? So you did business development there, actually out in Osaka, Japan. Could you talk us through a little bit what you were doing there? And I guess what was the jump into blockchain? How did that happen?
Yeah, so I'll start from the beginning. Moving to LA was kind of really about like the entourage thing. I wanted to go be in movies and television on the business side of it. And so to get to work with Ridley and Tony at that company at such a high level of food chain in Hollywood, it was a really cool opportunity to get exposed to things very quickly and realize I was more interested in technology. So as I was kind of moving from RSA and Scott Free it's right when Netflix was starting to kind of pick up and started to get a lot of the good content. So when I moved into technology, I really went more to the investment side. And so I would work with a lot of startups and founders, and I would kind of translate them to investors and kind of dot connect and put deals together. And so through that, I built a pretty strong network in LA. And I've always been somebody who thinks about blue oceans and kind of what's coming next and where the big opportunities are. So um, I left the sort of traditional world of startups and got into the Web3 stuff very quickly. And it was probably the time that I was in Rock Nation where Ethereum started to kick up, and there were a lot of sort of token models, and I looked at what was happening there and saw that it kind of reflected a lot of what the venture capital model was doing without really all of the stuff I didn't want to deal with. And I know you've gone through this realization as well. So it was that moment in the huge bull market of ICOs where like everything was happening all at once. And so in that 3 months I left Rock Nation. I started a company. I was recruited by a company in Japan to do some like enterprise blockchain work. And I was also sort of tapped by a guy named Peter Diamandis, who is the chairman of X Prize, Singularity University, and maybe 20 other companies. And so I was brought in to be kind of a sort of domain expert in Web3, help educate him and his whole ecosystem on the technology and the possibilities. So we built a big portfolio of advisor roles and different investments. And really, the most exciting thing I was doing was kind of overseeing the possibility of what X Prize 3.0 might look like. So if we could decentralize this model of crowdsourcing solutions to the world's biggest problems, that was where I really got very passionate about Web3 and what was possible. And I was given the purview of seeing all of the best deals in the entire world because Peter Diamandis sort of gets everything coming towards him, and I had to sift through all of that. And so very quickly I kind of figured out how to separate the signal from the noise. And there's a lot of lessons and models that I still draw from in that time. And as I was doing that, I came across Outlier Ventures.
There you
And you
go.
guys stood out. I'm not just going to blow smoke up your ass. You guys
No,
really did
please feel
stand out
free.
in
Blow all
terms
the
of
smoke up my
the
ass you want.
thinking. I mean, I've told you this privately, but you guys really stood out in the way that you were thinking about it. The convergence thesis and the convergence stack was very much the way I was seeing everything, um, and and so this was like a formative time. On one hand, the PTSD that still exists in terms of just how much complete bullshit there was, because you got to remember I was in ICOs in LA,
You're not talking
so
about
it
Outlier
was
now, right?
it
You're
was
talking
all.
about 2017.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. Um, so there was just a formative time, and I think people that lived through that could definitely relate to it. There were incredible lessons learned, and there was also, getting burnt by people who, didn't align with the integrity that I had, and I would say that sort of that span of time is really what like forged me and also my partner Toby in the things that we went through, in the ability for me to travel the world to 15 countries and sort of sit with all of the people behind the protocols and all of the people pitching these big ideas. And so I've developed some pattern recognition, right? And I think through all of this experience, I've honed in on what my personal thesis is. And Crucible is an extension of what that thesis is. The way that we execute the lessons learned and the opportunities that we've identified, that's what Crucible is for Toby and I.
All right, so we're going to get into exactly what Crucible is and everything else. It'd be good to just talk a little bit about Toby. I know you met him on another blockchain project, and like, what was it about Toby? I mean, when he explains his vision, he always talks about he's been trying to climb into a computer since he was a kid. It'd be interesting to understand, how you connected with him, and specifically, why it was this idea of self-sovereign identity that was the thing that you decided to, dedicate at least the next decade of your life, potentially more to, right?
Yeah, so the first project was something I started with the wrong people. It was just not aligned integrity. But the initial concept of this was that the blockchain could underpin the metaverse. It could be the economy for the metaverse. So we put this together in the middle of the ICO boom. I was a part of like, you know, a 9-figure token sale in Japan. And so all this stuff was happening at the same time. And we needed to really make it more real. We needed to find somebody who could write the technical documents, who could really start to get into the low level detail. And so we seeked out sort of, you know, all over the world people that were experts in this. And Toby has been and is, in my opinion, the sort of the leading voice of the spatial web and how to design protocols for how the internet becomes 3 dimensions, and not only just the technical but also the human, you know, like keeping humans at the center of this, having this be a human centric design that doesn't forget people in the name of efficiency. This is something that he really really believes in and cares about. And so this first, you know, I won't even call it a company, this first project, it was something that we needed to help each other out of. It was actually a quite tumultuous time, but we chose very quickly right after that to keep working because we realized like a lot of the bulk of the real work that was being done was between us, like me on the business and him on the tech. And so we pretty much right away got this new company going, and this is why it's called Crucible. That was a really difficult moment for us, and we chose to
Forged in
have
fire.
it forge us and turn it into something that was good. You know, if we were to like flash back to that time, it was a very sort of it was a very rocky and sort of turbulent time. But now looking at where we are at this point, I would say that it's probably our advantage. You know, the lessons that we've learned then are why we make certain decisions now. And as we are in this bull market, you know, which is probably going to dwarf anything that we saw in the ICOs, we have a real strong true north. We have a strong integrity. Toby and I are very different people, but we share that integrity, and that's what makes us a really great partnership.
So tell us about the SSI component, self sovereign identity, and its connection to the metaverse. And I know you often refer to this as direct to avatar and the direct to avatar commercial model. But let's first start with self sovereign identity, why that's important generally for the web, and then more specifically that in the context of the metaverse and avatars and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, and apologies for that background noise. I'm here in Amsterdam, and they're working on the street. But so after this project, we moved on, and we realized that like the spatial web is big. It's broad. Um, it's maybe too big. And if we're going to do this the way that we want to do it, let's think about how to prioritize all of this, you know? And so we quickly got into the identity. It actually didn't take very long. The identity is the focal point of this. Um, the user is the priority. So I was on a process of just kind of searching and learning as much as I could. And through, I believe, through knowing about Outlier and knowing about Sovereign and Evernym, I arrived in Barcelona at the Rebooting Web of Trust, which is a working group from W3C where these verifiable credentials are being written. And really, it's a room of the most brilliant minds that are talking about this. And I'm not a technical person, but I'm very proficient in technology, much like yourself. But when you go into these working groups, you're in very different waters, you know. So I got to see very quickly that the outside world doesn't think about this stuff very often. And these working groups inside the room, they only think about this, but they don't know how to make it as relevant to the outside world. You know, there's this language barrier that I found in founders and investors. Um, and so I really got into understanding the sort of standards that were being written, understanding verifiable claims and credentials, understanding DIDs, and realizing that like this is
Centralized
it. This is the
identifiers.
sort of yeah, this is it. These are the libraries of code, and this is the new standard for the way that will prove identity. Um, and then really decided to get into that first, you know. And from that, we learned, well, this could go so broad. I mean, there's so many different use cases that this will go into. But when we're talking about the metaverse and when we're talking about who Toby and I are as people, gaming, was the sort of obvious thing that no one was really talking about. And now I've done the work to realize that SSI has never been brought to gaming. We are the first ones to do that, and we've done the work to sort of uh, debug and thread, libraries like Hyperledger Indy, so that they're compatible with C++ engines like Unreal or C# like Unity. These things actually took many months for us to work through, and Toby's done an incredible job at this. And so once those connections happened, we've kind of unlocked what I believe the technical foundation of the metaverse or the open metaverse is, which is this sort of you know world-class standard for digital identity brought into the industry that is anti-fragile to what is happening in the world and exploding in terms of adoption. And I really think that gaming as a concept and as an industry and as a technology is the influential thing that will make the future of the economy.
So let's go to this direct to avatar. And so, obviously we're both sat here in avatars, and identities more complex on the web generally because you can have multiple identities. You could be pseudonymous. Equally, in the metaverse, I think it's just expected, normal that you would have multiple avatars, multiple identities, very kind of context specific identity. But associated to those identities, you've also got skins, increasingly digital fashion, collectibles. And in the Web3 world, for example, a lot of NFTs, non fungible tokens, which might represent these things, are currently often just sat in a wallet. They're not very social. You are starting to see them permeate into places like Decentraland or Somnium or Crypto Voxels. But of course, compared to the gaming world, the gaming industry, which is billions of dollars, billions of users, there's a huge amount of wealth and value associated to digital identities. So, could you talk us through the direct avatar concept and model? And I believe you coined the term direct avatar, right?
Yeah, when talking to the sort of outside world of business about this, and I think 2020 has really accelerated it all way further and sooner than we thought. But with new ideas, is that too loud, by the way, Roland?
No, it's fine. Carry
Just
on.
checking.
No, it's all
Okay.
good. Carry on.
So when people learn new ideas, they always like to draw a parallel back to something that they already understand. You know, so in business, there's been big shifts in supply chain, and direct to consumer is one of them, where we dematerialize 40% of it, and we have businesses sell directly to the front door of a user. And in a lot of ways, we're going through a shift like that again, more in the direction of gaming. And so direct to avatar is a fully dematerialized supply chain, and it takes from the lessons of gaming with skins like Epic and Riot Games making billions a year selling these skins. There is a very strong demand in the world for people to buy skins to express their avatars and spend time in these games. And so we know that 63% of players want to spend even more money on skins if there's a real world value, because this same generation has learned the real world value of uh, Web3 and NFTs. And you look at these things on the face of them and you say, well, a Fortnite skin and an NFT are not that different. From the file itself, you can see the sort of comparison. But, on one hand, the game in the server owns those assets and people are spending money and investing in them. And there's no secondary market for it. So I think this is a trend that will continue to happen. And we talk a lot about how the internet is for end users, and that's a core belief of ours. And so direct to avatar is kind of taking all of that and forming it into this idea where it's another shift for business to think about how to do business, and it's taking from some of the cues that we're seeing in gaming and pointing to this like future where if there is an economy for the metaverse, then it's going to shape up to look, like it does in gaming. And if we bring this Web3, thing that's happening, and we design it for gamers and bring it into the engine, then that is sort of the way to bring those things together and actually see the technical foundations for what that economy might look like.
And so obviously there's a couple of things there to unpack. So the first thing is the challenge with the metaverse at the moment, which is primarily, gaming environments, are that they're closed, they're proprietary, and that digital wealth is locked into them. So where all this time is spent in them, time and money, it's not transferable. And in a way, it's kind of like in a way, especially for younger generations where the majority of their wealth might be in this form, that means that ultimately they are excluded from the rest of the financial system. Like they can't get a loan on their current digital wealth. They could never get a mortgage. So they are to some extent financially excluded. And the idea could be if you could unlock this digital wealth from any one platform, and there could be a open economic layer, then it would be kind of more inclusive and then kind of open, inclusive metaverse economy. And then equally, if you look in a science fiction context, of course, the idea is that in Ready Player One, these kind of worlds were economies that were controlled and dominated by a single corporation. So, clearly that's not what we want to happen moving forward into the metaverse. Equally, when you're talking about this kind of dematerialization, I think that's, of course, just one aspect of the metaverse, right? Because as I'm sure you're going to kind of help explain now, the idea of the metaverse is where there is a blurring of the physical to the digital. So this isn't just about creating virtual worlds that are somehow separate from reality. It's actually how do we make the difference between these two worlds impossible to, or kind of one and the same. And interestingly, you and I just came from a little bit of a portfolio workshop with Boson Protocol, who are working on what's called de-commerce, decentralized commerce, specifically about linking the physical to the digital. So I don't know if you could just talk a little bit about, for you, this vision of the metaverse in the context of it being both physical and digital, one and the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So practically our product, we call it Emergence, is basically an agent to allow for game developers to build Web3 into these Unity and Unreal environments. And by Web3, we mean the SSI for user sovereignty, the NFTs, the DeFi protocols for new ways of doing finance and even making a living. So all of those things sort of as an agent.
And Unreal and Unity being the main gaming engines, right? So for
That's
people
right.
who don't
Yes.
know, these are the
So
two
Unreal
main
Engine
gaming
is owned by
engines that
Epic.
people are building virtual worlds.
Yep, sorry. So Unreal is owned by Epic Games, who own Fortnite, and then the Unity engine is now public, and it's a corporation that's publicly traded. So these are the two core engines. These are pretty much most of the market share. There's about 10 million developers across these two engines. And so our product is basically this agent that can bring that into the hands of these 10 million game developers. And so the agent is designed in order to be kind of an API routing where we can kind of plug in integrations with other blockchains or other protocols. And so the first integration we're doing, which we just announced yesterday, is Boson Protocol, who we were in Basecamp with. And this is a bridge where we can actually create a trustless, stateless way of doing commerce in the digital and the physical simultaneously. So when we talk about the open metaverse, we don't personally define it just as the virtual. We also think about the digital transformation of the physical world as well. You have smart cities shaping up all over the place. When the world unlocks and opens back up, innovation will be a true north for most places to try to get back on track. And so we see that to be a really strong opportunity as well.
Yeah, and of course, again, a lot of people, when they think about the metaverse, they think about it in purely a VR context, i.e., you're going into a kind of a separate reality. Whilst, of course, as you say, when you're talking about it in terms of smart cities, it's going to be about augmented reality and having, additional layers of reality overlaid onto the kind of physical or real world. So let's go into a bit more of the specifics of Emergent Sdk, which is your software development kit. So specifically, what does it functionally allow you to do as a user in the metaverse?
So I'll go back to where we started. We had this idea, and it was big and it was broad. And actually, we applied to Basecamp the first time and were denied. And I took that as a challenge that we needed to sort of like find a way to get a little bit more specific in the product itself. So I sort of I grew a relationship with you guys, kind of joined as an ambassador. I flew to Berlin for diffusion, and my experience there started to really shape in this idea of like a meta mask for SSI and gaming. And then after we got to know each other and had a great couple of days in Berlin, we reapplied with this concept, and I believe that's a large part of the reason why we got in. And so that was the kind of like the first step, right? Is this browser extension that, again, we can draw a parallel to MetaMask. We understand that, but it's on steroids. It brings a lot more to it. And then our time, in Basecamp and my time in Emerson with you, it's like we really shaped this up to be what it is now, which we call the user agent. So that's across a mobile app, a browser extension, and an overlay in the games that drop the SDK in. And it's the same design, same UI. And it's essentially the onboarding of SSI. So you have a completely sovereign user identity through a DID. And then that identity could layer. Absolutely. Through SSI, it's a portable digital identity. It's secure for account security. It's encrypted. It's compliant with GDPR, CCPA, and everything that will come from that. And it's passwordless. All the things that make up SSI, all the features. But we've designed it to feel like a game interface. And so on this DID, you have many different verifiable credentials that can be expressed as personas. And each of these personas is assigned an avatar that you can fully customize. So we're bringing in avatar creators like Wolf3D and Genies. We'll have MetaHuman, which is Unreal's, newly revealed productization of all of the digital human work that they've done.
Man, we're going to have
and
to
the
talk
idea
about
is
that
that you
later,
have this. Yeah, you have this one agent, this passport that can manage all of your identities in the way that you want. You can define them on persona archetypes like gamer or artist or collector or fashion designer or DJ. And that's a configuration of how you'll use that avatar. But really at the core of it, it's the DID and the VCs, and each persona might have a different avatar and you might use that for very different things. But when you have each persona, that has its features. So you have this way of managing all the identities. And then once you select that persona and that avatar, you have the full power of Web3 at your fingertips. Our design principle is that if you could figure out how to use a Facebook profile, then you should be able to figure out how to use Web3 to build digital wealth and build an empire in the metaverse. There should be no reason why it's more complicated than that. And so we've taken communication and commerce and all of the features, but peer-to-peer and encrypted, and we've put it in the agent so that you have the ability to start living life this way.
So before we go into like all the possibilities that come off the back of that, I think it might be good to just try to give a layman's explanation of a DID and a verifiable claim, because a lot of people aren't familiar with these things. As you referenced, I think at the top, that these are standards that have been developed at the World Wide Web Foundation with a number of players, both within our kind of mutual network, but also OGs that have just been working on the problem of identity like their whole lives, their careers, since they've been involved in the internet. But could you just explain a DID, decentralized identifier, and a verifiable claim?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just go back to the beginning again. It's one of the times when I was traveling the world and kind of figuring this all out. I had a trip to London, and my intention was to meet with yourself and to meet with Evernet. And I wasn't able to catch up with you, but I was able to meet with Andrew Tobin. And he's a hugely important character in this story of Crucible as well. And Andrew is, the managing director of Evernym in Europe, or in London, and just the nicest guy ever. And he really kind of explained all of this to me in a way that was the antithesis of those working groups. Like, I got the technical stuff, from the working groups, but from Andrew, I got like the human side of it. He's very good at talking about this stuff in a human way, as somebody who has a background in business. And so, really, the way to think of it is credentials are the way we've always proven identity. It started with paper, with our government or our ruler or whoever, and now it's emails on the internet. So pretty much everything that you use on the internet, your account is your email. Even Facebook, when you log in with Facebook, that's your Gmail or whatever email you've linked it to. And most people are pretty much using all of their passwords for the same account. It's very vulnerable. Hackers can do things called credential stuffing, where if they find one password, there's software that can run thousands and millions of programs and just figure out which other passwords you use it for. And so no. And so that's, it's really a vulnerable place to be. So with DIDs and VCs, it's about proving your identity in an encrypted way on the blockchain. So the same trust that we're putting into Bitcoin and Ethereum and all this stuff for currencies and, new ways of designing societies, this is doing that same thing for identity. And so you get your DID, which proves you as a human being. And then you get a collection of verifiable credentials to prove you within the context of a relationship that you have with a company or a person or an account with something.
Yeah, so I think there's a really important part of that, which is context specific identity and proofs. But then also this idea that you can prove something about yourself, you can attest to something without revealing the underlying data. So, like, the best example of that is I can prove I'm over 18 without revealing my date of birth, which you then have to somehow store and keep safe, which, as we know, is impossible. So actually, it removes the burden of a central party having to secure personal data that actually it doesn't need. And it allows the user to have very context-specific relationships. And I think this is increasingly important. You mentioned GDPR a little bit earlier. So GDPR, for those that don't know, are kind of data laws, data privacy laws here in Europe. And they have now made it a liability, like a hard financial liability to the bottom line of corporations, that if they break data laws, they fail to secure users, consumers, customers' personal data, then they can be fined I think it's a percentage of their overall global turnover. So this is like, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions in fines. And so all of a sudden, there's a real burning platform for organizations to kind of devolve the responsibility away from themselves to the user. And of course, that needs to be done in a secure way. And so this is why DIDs and verifiable claims are becoming increasingly important to not just the end individual, but also regulators and corporations. So it's actually a good example of positive regulation, albeit these things always struggle to kind of keep pace with technologies, and GDPR and blockchain are obviously one such example.
And I'll add something to that too.
Zoom out. So now,
I'll add something to that. So part of the value proposition of, say, zero knowledge proofs, where you can prove you are something without your personal identifying information out there, and the way that we use it is anonymity with accountability. Right. So if we want to give people the right to be forgotten and move around anonymously with these proofs, we need to make sure that if they cross this other side of the legal limit, that they're accountable in some way. And that's been very difficult to do. And in gaming, when we talk about Roblox or Fortnite, there's so many children. right? This becomes very paramount in the discussions that we have. And so this like anonymity with accountability was a catch-22 that, now we've kind of designed somewhat of a solution for. And I think that's going to be really important as we move into a direct avatar economy.
Right, yeah, and don't talk to me about Roblox. It's the thing my daughter plays on at the moment. She's 7.5, and she keeps getting scammed because people pretend to be either poor in the game. I mean, they might actually be poor, but they like beg, or people pretend to do a trade and then don't actually pass over the goods. So these, and of course this is like very small amounts of, but Roblox that are being used, or like virtual monies. But you can extend that up into other environments where, should we want a Metaverse bazaar, which is what Justin Bannon talks about of Boson Protocol we were talking about earlier, then you need to be able to know the counterparty that you're interacting with. There needs to be accountability, and then there's also other various things using game theoretics about how we can try to close down those relationships, or those transactions.
I was wondering when she was going to graduate from Animal Crossing to Roblox.
It's happened, yeah. It's happened, yeah. She got a bit bored with Animal Crossing, actually. So let's zoom out, right? So, and this is actually a good segue. So once you've secured identity in the metaverse, you can then associate a vault of assets and digital wealth to that identity and manage them. And I think this was a really exciting outcome of our collaboration through Basecamp, our accelerator, and beyond, which is, once you've solved for identity, what next? So could you talk us through some of the thinking around the vault that you're developing, and something called Artifact, which effectively is a digital asset marketplace standard for the direct to avatar economy?
Yeah, so the vault is one of the main features of the agent, and you can kind of think of it starting with like a LastPass, right? So it's a password and key manager, but it's really where you can kind of put everything that you don't want out there. So in this ability to go anonymous or not have your PII or your personal identifying information out there, there's a lot of stuff that you want to keep locked down, and so that's the vault. And it's also a way to kind of, because this is a passwordless way of logging into things, you have your one master password to get into the agent, but then all of the credentials and the accounts and the things that you're actually using, they don't need a password. So you can lock all these things down in the vault. And then for the artifact, that's a working title that we've been kind of thinking a lot about, and it comes based off of the idea of what down the line the full implementation of all this could be with self-signing tokens, portable self-signing tokens that are fully contained to themselves. And we're both close with the inventors of SSI and the people that wrote the standards. And when you talk to them, the blockchain dependence was never really the idea. The idea of getting caught in the sunk cost of Ethereum or any other politics of a brand that is a blockchain is not actually true sovereignty. So when these standards were written, the heuristics were about true sovereignty and software that could create sovereign individuals. And so we're really excited about that. And we've thought about how we can kind of take that and make our own artifact standard so that a lot of these marketplaces could have provable scarcity, could have chain of custody, and all of these things without necessarily being dependent on a blockchain or a specific blockchain. And I think that's a little further out, but that's our aspirations where we want to get to.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, i.e. the permaweb, and I know you guys are looking at leveraging things like Arweave to enable a permaweb. But I think just to kind of focus a little bit more on this digital wealth component, we were talking earlier about how much is kind of locked into these gaming environments, these specific games or platforms. And I know you guys are also looking at kind of backward compatibility, right? The idea that you can take digital wealth locked in platforms, even for games that might be redundant now, and you can bring them into this new metaverse. Could you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a general shift in the market of gaming, and I think a lot of people really recognize it. We're very fortunate that Tim Sweeney is driving the innovation in this, and he happens to own the biggest companies in games. And so, in any other industry, it's like being able to go to the leader of that industry and have them be the one taking the risk to pioneer. So, gaming is really fortunate for that. And what Tim has done successfully with Fortnite is prove that when you go cross-platform, it could actually lift revenue between 20 and 40%, right? So there's like a hard, metric of real business metric behind this. And so you see Activision go to free to play and cross-platform with things like Warzone, and that's things that just wouldn't have happened. So you look at kind of the moves that Tim Sweeney makes, and specifically, what he's proving out, and it leads more towards now what is federated identity, and eventually what will be decentralized identity. And the current state of gaming right now is federated. So you got Epic Online Services, you got Amazon Persona, you got in some ways Microsoft Game Stack with PlayFab, and each of these systems are moving more cross-platform and more federated. Our goal and what our roadmap is to drive as much of that to decentralized as we can, and we've designed the SDK to do that and make it very easy. Once that total addressable market is there, that is the direct to avatar economy. Now we have the ability to create user generated movements and user generated marketplaces and a whole sort of peer to peer layer of commerce and communication between avatars, and that will become something that thrives, and other gaming developers and publishers and even studios will want to integrate into that as an on-ramp to the open metaverse. We know that the sort of appetite is there now for them to figure out NFTs and all these like really buzzy things that are happening. But what Crucible's done is like design a really foundational, easy to drop in solution as an on-ramp, and then there's a spectrum. How much interoperability do you want? Do you just want to test it? Do you want to see what it's like to mint NFTs that don't affect the game but could be new revenue for you? Or do you want to actually put it out and actually start to allow outside things into the game? Do you want to tap into this market network, that's beginning to build? I think it's going to be a choose your own adventure, and we've designed this to be kind of a spectrum. And I've done 2 years of work knowing everyone in the industry and where they fall in that spectrum.
Yeah, and so once you've now got digital wealth associated to self-sovereign identity, I guess optional, but you have kind of self-custody of this digital wealth. One of the ideas I know you guys are working on is the idea that these assets can then be collateral in DeFi, obviously through the form of NFTs, non-fungible tokens, effectively tokens that are unique, non-fungible. And so could you talk us through your vision for NFTs and DeFi in the context of the metaverse? And I know you're also working on a token to kind of help optimize that economy as well.
Yeah, so to me, when I reflect on everything happening, the most important thing happening in NFTs, in Web3, in gaming, it's community driven. These are community driven movements. And so when we look and think about the open metaverse or where gaming is going, or even the NFT, thing that's happening with artists, it's the powers in the community. And so what we want to do is actually create a token that ties that community together, and actually gives that community a voice to continue to drive it. And then give them the tools for an economy around that. So we've thought about the token and the model, and we've arrived to sort of, this DAO structure where we can define all the companies that share this vision of an open metaverse, a token to create the membership for that, and to give voting, in the direction of that. And then through the agent as an interface, you can use the token to sort of buy into the economy. And so all of your assets and your NFTs can be banked, and you can receive some collateral back from that in terms of a credit or a social token. And so we have this growing economy in which the value is derived from the collective contribution of what the atomic units of this open metaverse is. And so, I think there's a really exciting idea there. And there's a lot of companies, big and small, that really share this vision. I formed a kind of consortium approach to this called Blueprints for the Open Metaverse. And every person or company that aligns with this vision has sort of begun to come forward. I get calls every week, which are really incredible. Sometimes people that lead the gaming divisions of massive companies that tell me if I wasn't at this company, I would be building what you're doing, because they actually, as a person and as a gamer, they believe it and they see it. But from this, position in this giant organization, it's going to take some stakeholding, and we found those allies. So this consortium approach has really begun to identify who should make up this DAO, and the model is going to shape up as a giant global decentralized family that together is going to fund and commission and make the direct to avatar economy happen.
Yeah, and just to be clear, when we say a DAO, we mean a decentralized autonomous organization. Again, for those that aren't as familiar with Web3, but perhaps coming at this from a gaming perspective. And that's effectively smart contracts that enable the collective ownership and kind of coordination of digital wealth assets that it might have under its control. And I know one of the big ideas is that if for every user that effectively participates, they can join this by kind of locking up some of their collateral, their digital wealth. Firstly, transferring it out of closed platforms into an open environment, and then using that as collateral to stake into the system. And I really like that idea of kind of banking the metaverse. I think that's a really cool concept. So you were talking about
And
some
true, also, so
of the
true to
partners
the
and
form of gaming, we've also designed, and this will be a little further down the line. We'll start sharing some of this soon, but we've designed a meta game because we wanted to put a game mechanic to the adoption of the open metaverse. There are intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. When you look at gamification, I'm a student of something called Octalysis, OCTLYSIS,
sounds
and
like a
it is a
disease.
framework. Yeah. It is a framework for the intrinsic and extrinsic human motivators separated by black hat and white hat. And you get this eight-point framework to really think about all these human behavior and how you can reward good and minimize bad. And we've really designed this metagame that takes into account the things happening in NFTs. But what's exciting for me about NFTs is where I believe this gets to is world building. I think NFTs is like the atomic unit of all of this economy. You can prove scarcity, you could withhold supply, and this metagame will be a game that you can play, and the act of playing it is an earn mechanism. It's a play to earn mechanism, and not only just play to earn, but also play to build worlds, and all of those worlds together will make up this open metaverse. So, we're really excited about what's happening in Flow. We're going to build on Flow, and also kind of bring other chains into it as well. But this is something we'll share a little more of as it happens. And the idea for the game is around collectible culture and how NFTs can become, fossils of things that happen in culture, snapshots of a certain moment, or a brand collaboration that represents something important. So we'll have the Emergence collection. We'll do some NFT drops. And if it's a part of the Emergence collection, it will then have metaverse utility through the agent and through our products that we will make available.
Yeah, so let's talk about the collection and the drops, because I know like every week I kind of chat to you offline, and the really exciting partnerships. I'm sure you can talk about some of them and not others, but I know it spans fashion with digital wearables, as you say, art, music. Could you talk us through some of the kind of collaborators that you have in mind for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is kind of where I take the front step here. I'm a '90s kid of culture. Like you said before, I was a part of breaking a lot of big artists with, the Monster Energy tour. So I've been deeply a part of all the subcultures from streetwear to hip hop to electronic music. And there's a lot of brands that natively came from that. There's brands that are just plastic and, they just sell things in shopping malls, but there's also really incredibly executed brands of culture. And so those are the ones that have actually stepped forward most, just organically, because they see what's happening and they're excited about it. And so the idea with the drops is like we kind of put together strategic collections that are really interesting with these brands that are coming forward or with these DJs, that we're building a relationship with, and it's really sort of organized itself because there are musicians and DJs and brands that are building with Unreal. They've got there on their own, and so we know that, like, there's that aligned vision, and so they're all kind of just stepping forward. I've been building relationships with them. The first one is a partnership with a group called MXR, and they're our production partner. So they do the best scanning for digital assets that you'll ever see. They did an AR shoe that went viral, that the light came through and you could barely tell that it wasn't real. They went through the Farfetch accelerator, and so they have this method, and they've worked with some brands and basically turned the garment into a skin. And that skin is a Clo 3D file, and people that are in digital fashion understand that. So what we'll do is we'll drop, an NFT that is a work of fashion digital art, and with that art will come the skin, the asset. And so now that skin will be able to be compatible in the Emergence, agent. You'll be able to try it on avatars down the line, and we'll start to breathe life into these NFTs and these assets through the metaverse. And there will be tons of others. I can't really name all of them just yet, but some of the biggest fashion brands in the world, definitely the biggest DJs and the most influential DJs in the world. And it's going to be very exciting.
Sure, and it is really exciting, and I think that had that been a couple of months ago, it would almost been unbelievable, right? But now everybody can see with their own eyes the just amount of like established talent that's coming to space, established brands, luxury brands. But I also think it's important, like it's not just about bringing established entities and brands into the metaverse. Of course, that's a big part of it. They've got ready-made audiences or markets. But again, I've had several conversations with you about this idea of virtual first brands. So brands that are born into the metaverse and that then begin to extend into the real world. So that could be a digital fashion brand that then ends up actually making clothes. Could we kind of end on that, your vision for how, rather than it being this kind of separate thing, we're going to start to see metaverse native brands take over the world?
Yeah, I think the significance of what we see happening with the blockchain is that, this generation is starting to use this tech to reflect. It's a philosophical thing. What is money? What is value? What is art? Right? What is identity? And we're going through this process. I love the way Michael Saylor talks about this. Everyone has a choice to stick with the fiat standard or to move on to this Bitcoin and blockchain standard that's performing much better. And these are almost like creatures in cyberspace. They're not companies led by single people, and they're not dominate. And so with NFTs, we see all of this creative energy being accumulated in the same way that we saw monetary energy accumulated with Bitcoin. And just as a couple of days ago, I'm sure like NFTs has officially gone mainstream. My friend Pablo bought a Beeple for 66,000 in October and just sold it for 6.6 million a couple of days ago. And that's the same day that Christie's is auctioning Beeple's digital body of work. So this is like a real watershed moment happening. And so I've been utilizing Clubhouse quite a lot. We just passed 10,000 in reach, and we have a club, and it's all about the open metaverse. And so through this moment, I mean, I get called into rooms with literally the sort of like biggest artists and brands, and they're all trying to figure this thing out, and they're trying to make their shift into it. But what's really exciting is the new native things that will be built from this. You can kind of think Shopify is to direct to consumer what Crucible is to direct to avatar, right? So we're really excited about being almost this set of tooling for, yes, existing established brands and folks to move into this and to create a strategy for it, but also what will be born from this that's brand new, that has no shackles to the old sort of way and is not copy and pasting anything into this new world. So what brands exist? And I think a great example is Artifact Studios is in some ways a native Supreme to the metaverse. They've done really great partnerships with, Tesla and PlayStation to create these sneakers, and they've moved on to the Meta Jacket, which is totally an original thing that they've hit probably 100,000 with the auction, and they're going to start to do more of this sort of brand collaboration streetwear stuff, but really native to the metaverse. They have a partnership with Snap. They're creating AR filters. Just like, what more can exist like that? You talk about the LVMH of the metaverse. What is the brand portfolio that comes together that represents something that is culturally relevant with this? And what have we not even imagined yet?
Yeah, super fascinating stuff. So, Ryan, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show. You had to be our first guest. We finally made it happen, although, despite the fact that somebody decided to literally tear down your street outside your flat whilst we were doing this, we can't control what happens in the physical world. So, well done for being a pro and working through that. I'm sure that was incredibly distracting. But where can people find you? So how do people find you personally? Both Crucible, you mentioned you've got this clubhouse. What's the name of it? How can people get involved in the open metaverse?
Yeah, so I am Ryan Gill, Gill. The website is crucible.network. Email is ryan@crucible. The clubhouse is really interesting. It's been a fascinating sort of social experiment. I set up a club called The Open Metaverse. I brought the metaverse discussion to Clubhouse, was early in bringing the NFT discussion. And it's been the sort of place to go to connect into the heartbeat of everything happening. So we have, I do a weekly thing called This Week in the Metaverse, where I just bring my friends up that are in the headlines and, allow people to learn about this stuff and really get connected with the people. We bring people up on stage for Q&As, and it's been an incredible community building thing. I also have a Telegram, channel that's really shaping into the NFT space. All the big NFT artists and founders of the platforms are there. We will get the Discord set up more for the game developers and the gaming side of things. And yeah, it's open, so come say hi. Come be a part of this. If you share this vision, even just quietly on your own, you're just as much a part of this as anyone else. And I will be driving the partnerships with the big gaming companies. We're having great conversations with the Epics and the Ubisofts, and but it's also really important that the people and the community drive this thing.
And website and Twitter handles, please.
Twitter handle is @Crucible Network, I believe. And my Twitter is at Ryan Crucible.
And the website is crucible.network, right? I think, if I remember rightly.
Website is crucible.network, yes. Yeah.
go.
And we'll have, if you go and you opt into our list, you'll get updates on the Substack. We're publishing a lot there. We'll start doing a lot of developer diaries as we move into our alpha this week, actually. I'm onboarding about 5 or 6 key Unreal projects from all different industries this week so that we can start the alpha first thing next month. And yeah, we'll start to actually really start to tell the narrative more.
Awesome. Ryan, thanks for coming on. I hate to see what's happened outside your window, but as I said, thanks for being so professional. Before we go, just want to give you a little bit more information on what we're hoping to do with this format. So, as I said, we'll be doing this every week. It should be going live on YouTube, outlierventures.io. Sorry, youtube.com/Outlier Ventures. You can subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. Probably be going out in the afternoon on a Friday every week, UK time. We'll also be feeding some of it into Twitter as well, so you can follow the Outlier Twitter handle OVO OVO.io HQ. Outlier's website is outlierventures.io. Throughout that interview, you heard Ryan very kindly talk about his experience with Outlier through something called Basecamp. Basecamp is our accelerator dedicated to the metaverse. We've been accelerating Web3 founders for over 7 years now. We're the longest running accelerator in the space and fund in Europe. And we work exclusively with teams, founders at different stages, pre-seed all the way up to late stage seed, who are working within the NFT space and DeFi, increasingly in combination. And we are actively recruiting right now for what will be cohort 5, which will start in Q2. However, we also have something called Ascent. So apart from Basecamp, which is outlierventures.io/Basecamp, we've got something called outlierventures.io/Ascent, following that mountaineering analogy. For later stage projects that are on the Ascent, these are later stage tokenized networks that are about to launch, usually 6 to 8 weeks away from launch, and we help them go out with a bang. So rather than going out as a small cap, we aim to get them out at $1 billion plus. We're highly selective of the projects that we bring into that program. They have to have a high degree of readiness. Yeah, Ryan and his project will hopefully be joining the next one. But equally apply to Ascent if you're a later stage project that needs help. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed the show. It's going to be interesting to see whether it was a bit buggy. I know there's a bit of a sound delay between Ryan and I. We'll see how that comes out in post. What I always say when we try to do things in the metaverse, in virtual environments, especially open ones, is it's beautifully messy, right? You know, what we're doing is often being done for the first time. There's lots of technical bugs and fitches. So learn to enjoy all of those. We try to tell ourselves that every time we break something. So thanks for bearing with us with any kind of technical problems, and hopefully we get better and better each time. If you have any ideas for the format in the show, you can at me at Jamie247. Other than that, I will see you next week. Thanks, Ryan, and thanks for everybody else joining us.
Continuous improvement.